Hey everybody, Trey here. Welcome back to another forecast discussion. Our active fall and winter severe weather season continues as we head into the new year. The SPC has outlined an enhanced risk, level 3 out of 5, for the Arklatex vicinity on Monday, January 2nd, including places like Little Rock, down toward El Dorado, Shreveport, Tyler, and Longview on the I-20 corridor there in northeast Texas, as well as down toward the Nacogdoches and Lufkin area, with a slight risk surrounding that for places like Fort Smith, Houston and Galveston, Lake Charles. Dallas-Fort Worth is on the very western fringe of that slight risk area. Fort Worth itself is in the marginal risk area, whereas the eastern portions of the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area are within that slight risk. So for now, I would just consider Dallas-Fort Worth as in that slight risk area with a chance for severe storms on Monday. But the main threat for the greatest threat for severe storms, perhaps significant severe storms, is going to be within that enhanced risk area. We do have a 30% hatched contour for some significant damaging winds and possible strong tornadoes there for the Arklatex vicinity, as we've seen numerous times here in this secondary severe weather season. Then the severe threat shifts toward the southeast for places like southeast Louisiana, much of Mississippi, and Alabama on Tuesday, January 3rd. A 15% or slight risk, level 2 out of 5, there for those areas as the severe threat shifts off toward the east. So we're going to take a look at some models, different models in this video, kind of compare and contrast as we usually do. We'll take a look at the NAM, the GFS, and the European model, and kind of take a look at the similarities and differences that are evident in the models at this range. Of course, as we know, at this range, there's always going to be some inherent discrepancy in those models that will kind of work itself out as we go into the next couple of days. We're also going to take a look at some current data, take a look at the current state of the atmosphere, and what we can expect as we go into the Monday, Tuesday timeframe. So let's go ahead and get started here. We'll start off as we usually do with our water vapor satellite imagery. A couple things you can see right off the bat here. This sort of southwest kind of swath of flow here across the eastern half of the U.S. that is associated with a little bit of a trough centered across the Gulf Coast states, producing some thunderstorms there off the western Florida coast that will move out over the next couple of days. And you can see this stretch of kind of just westerly flow here across the California, Nevada vicinity there. That is the beginnings of the trough that will start to dig down into the desert southwest come tomorrow, produce some heavy rain and some embedded thunderstorms there for places like Arizona into New Mexico tomorrow. And then it will continue to dig, and that will be our main player as we go into Monday and Tuesday for our severe weather threat. You can see there at the 500 millibar map here, this is at 17Z, so about 18,000 feet off the ground. And so you can see that troughiness there across the eastern half of the country, some storminess there off the western Florida coast. Again, that will move out pretty quickly over the coming day or so, and as it gets replaced by this west coast trough that will start to dig down. And we'll take a look at the models here in a second. A little bit of ridging as we speak right now, just out ahead of that trough, but again, that will get suppressed. And we do have some sort of westerly flow across the Rockies as we speak over the last day or so. So we do have this kind of weak troughiness on the lee side of the Rockies. You can see this little bit of weak kind of troughiness there with an attendant sort of mass response over the southern plains into the Midwest. That should tighten as we get our trough to kind of dig down and amplify and then traverse the Rockies. We'll get much stronger southwesterly flow to traverse the Rockies, and that's when we'll see very strong lee cyclogenesis on the east side of the Rockies, somewhere in eastern Colorado to northeast New Mexico in there. And of course, as we know, what that does is it allows the winds in the warm sector to strengthen, really start to pull that moisture northward, as well as increase the low-level shear for our event on Monday. Here's our surface pattern. As you can see, once again, a little bit of troughiness here, maybe a surface low center being analyzed there at the Oklahoma and northern Texas panhandle vicinity. But again, it's kind of a weak sort of troughiness regime here on the lee side of the Rockies. Again, that will strengthen pretty significantly as that trough digs down and traverses the Rockies come Monday morning. So let's take a look at our current surface data, see where our dew points are hanging out here. And you can see in the 60s dew points, the rich Gulf air is confined over the open waters of the Gulf of Mexico, even places like Houston and Galveston, only in the kind of low to mid, even upper 50s there. And so our moisture is going to need to be pulled northward, kind of a contrast of the last couple events where we've seen our moisture kind of in place already by the time the trough gets here. It's not going to be the case. We're going to have to pull that moisture northward over the coming days, including on Monday. So this may be some semblance of kind of just-in-time moisture, although the moisture plume associated with this trough will be fairly significant. So we will see that moisture really stream northward and get into places like southern Missouri by Monday afternoon. So we'll take a look at some soundings here. I want to start off at 0Z yesterday evening. So this will be December 31st at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time here is when these soundings were released. I want to take a look at this western Mexico sounding here. And I want you to notice this layer right in here, just off the surface, this layer of steep lapse rates and drier air. That is our elevated mix layer. It's kind of cool that we actually can see the origins of the elevated mix layer. And that is just kind of sitting there. We expect kind of sunny skies here over western Mexico over the coming days. So this should be the same scenario over the coming days. If you were to look at the 0Z sounding this evening and tomorrow evening, you kind of see the same thing. This elevated mix layer is going to get pulled northward or northeastward over Texas as we go into Monday, and I'll show you that on the models as well. So we're going to have a pretty stout elevated mix layer in place, and as we know, the elevated mix layer helps to cap the atmosphere in the warm sector on a severe weather day, so we don't get, as we call it, crapvection, so to speak, to kind of hamper the environment later on for our main wave of severe weather on a given setup. It also allows instability to build. So we could see a pretty robust amount of instability start to build as that EML kind of caps the atmosphere in the morning hours on Monday. So something interesting to note there. Just wanted to take a look at that. We'll take a look at some morning soundings from this morning, 12Z. I want to start here down on the Gulf Coast and kind of take a look at what we're seeing. So here at Brownsville, we have a very sort of shallow moist layer. It really is only at the surface. 60 over 59 there at Brownsville before the temperature warms and the dew point craters there just above the surface. So some very dry air aloft, kind of, relatively speaking for this area. We usually see a sort of deeper moist layer here. Not really the case. That deeper moisture is sitting in the Gulf, as we said a few minutes ago. Here's Lake Charles this morning. A little bit deeper of a moist layer there. We're just kind of into those 60s dew points at Lake Charles, Louisiana. We do see some semblance of maybe a little bit of an elevated mix layer there that has emanated from the west. Again, that's going to strengthen as it gets transported across Texas over the coming days with the entrance of that mid-level trough. So decent looking environment there already. Again, the better moisture is going to be off here into the Gulf. We should start to see, once that surface low develops on Monday, we'll see these surface winds start to really back out of the south or southeast and really start to pump that moisture northward on probably Sunday evening, going through the morning hours and into the afternoon on Monday. So that's what's going on currently. Let's go ahead and dive into some model data. This is going to be the 12Z NAM, the 12Z GFS, and the 6Z Euro. Unfortunately, the Euro is not quite in yet. The latest run is not quite in yet. So we're going to have to compare the 6Z Euro to the previous 12Z, the 12Z GFS and NAM. So these are the fresh 12Z and NAM and GFS models. We'll start off here with the NAM. And you can see the initializations initialized pretty well, troughiness across the eastern half of the country, and the start of our troughiness here approaching the west coast. Again, you'll see that as we go through with time, really start to dig and amplify into western Mexico. The desert southwest should be quite a bit of storminess here tomorrow for Arizona. Looks like a sort of strongly forced squall line moves through the Phoenix metro area and areas to the north and south tomorrow morning. Some embedded lightning strikes with that. But this trough will continue to dig and take on a little bit of a neutral or negative tilt as we go into Tuesday. You can see there kind of a neutrally, maybe slightly negative tilt trough here, extending into the southern plains on Monday afternoon. Interesting structure here as forecast by the NAM. We kind of have that dual jet structure that we talked about before with events like December 10th, 2021. Not saying that this is going to be anywhere near that kind of event, but it has some similarities in the upper air pattern, although we have a much more amplified trough feature here at 500 millibars with this particular event. But we do have that kind of dual jet structure, this kind of belt of flow just off to the east a little bit of the main wave, which is kind of out in here, the main sort of forcing with that trough over the Texas Panhandle, western Oklahoma, western Kansas. And then we have our kind of secondary jet out here across East Texas, eastern Oklahoma, into western Arkansas, all the way up into Missouri. So an interesting structure there, and that can be enough to initiate storms out ahead of the main wave. And we've talked about defluence aloft before. That's that spreading apart of the wind vectors with height creates that void that allows the atmosphere to bring that air up from below to fill that void. That's how we get large-scale rising motion. Well, if you have just a belt of strong flow aloft, that can also initiate rising motion as well. Think of it as a vacuum cleaner effect. The aloft, the trough, this kind of the strong winds aloft push air away from a given region, and the atmosphere doesn't like that. So what happens is it allows kind of a vacuum cleaner effect to happen, and the atmosphere wants to bring that air from below aloft once again. And that's how we also can get rising motion in this kind of within a belt of enhanced flow aloft. So something to watch there. We're a little bit ahead of the main forcing with this kind of secondary belt of enhanced flow. So that may have some implications on storm mode in the open warm sector. And we'll talk about that more in a second. So this is at 21Z Monday, so early to mid-afternoon Monday. Let's take a look at the GFS. We'll take a look at how the GFS progresses here with time. You can see much of the same. That trough really starts to dig into the southwest. And this is 21Z on Monday. You can see it's a very similar sort of pattern, but a little bit different in the portrayal of the overall trough. And let's take a look at that. So the NAM has kind of an open wave here with this kind of dual jet structure. The GFS is a little, I guess, less tightly wound, for lack of a better term. You can see that the trough is quite compact here with the NAM, very compact sort of belt of flow rounding the base of that trough with that secondary structure out to the east. Whereas the GFS is a little bit more fanned out, a little bit more maybe sort of positively tilted. You can see the axis maybe kind of right in there, maybe slightly more positively tilted than what the NAM was showing. Is that going to make a difference overall? Probably not in the grand scheme of things. It may just, make a little bit of difference as far as the overall wind profile goes, but still, this is a favorable look for severe weather. Strong belt of flow rounding the base of that trough with that kind of belt of enhanced flow out toward the east as well, across East Texas into eastern Oklahoma and Arkansas. We'll take a look at the Euro now as well. Once again, similar story, and the Euro shows a similar portrayal to the NAM, maybe the most negatively tilted of the three models here, but a very similar look than the other two models. You can see as we go side by side here, the NAM and the Euro model are pretty similar, with the GFS a little bit just less wound up, so to speak, a little bit more positively tilted here, but overall the same sort of scenario. And this is just indicative of the kind of model differences we're seeing. They have definitely improved over the last several runs, but we're still seeing some differences in the models that will get resolved over the coming days. So overall, a pretty favorable picture for severe weather. We're going to, again, start off with Monday here. We'll move into Tuesday in a second. I want to go down to 850 millibars here. Take a look at our low-level jet. And that is going to be a result of our Lee cyclogenesis here. We'll see this as we go through with time. We get that kind of weak troughiness over the central and southern plains. And then by kind of late Sunday to Monday morning, we start to get very strong cyclogenesis there in eastern Colorado, very broad low-level cyclone there at 850 millibars. We'll go on to 21Z here, and you can see a broad low-level jet across the region, basically from northeast and east Texas up through eastern Oklahoma and areas out to the east. So a very broad swath of strong flow in the low levels. We know what that does. It allows the wind profiles to really increase across the region. That low-level wind shear increases, favorable for tornadic supercells, possibly given a favorable storm mode. It also pumps that moisture northward and allows for a broad warm sector to develop. Let's take a look at our GFS run here. Going to see much of the same. I guess we should put it on 850 millibars here. So we go through with time, and then you can see by really late Sunday night to early Monday morning, we start to see that broad belt of enhanced flow there across the southern plains as that Lee cyclone develops. By 21Z, broad swath here across the same regions as we saw on the NAM. Very strong flow, 50, 55 to 60 knots here across that Arklatex vicinity, which is why the enhanced risk is where it is. That low-level jet, very strong right in that region. NAM and GFS pretty much showing the same thing there. We'll take a look here now at the European model, how it depicts the low-level jet there. So the Euro looking at a little bit of a stronger low-level jet there in the 50s, 60s range there, but a broader swath of those kind of red colors there, which are the stronger winds. So definitely a little bit stronger of a solution here with the European model, a little bit farther south as well, just a hair south, and that may have implications on how far north the overall warm sector gets here. But overall, same sort of picture, strong low-level jet across the region, kind of centered on that Arklatex vicinity come Monday afternoon. Let's go down to the surface here and take a look at our surface pattern. We should see much of the same here as the low 850 millibar pattern. That surface low should start to develop as that 500 millibar wave makes its way across the Rockies. So once again, with time, we get surface low development here come Monday morning, and that is going to help again back those winds in the across central and eastern Texas into the Arklatex vicinity, help pump that moisture northward. You can see winds here out of the south and south-southeast here, so very favorable setup for some severe storms, with that warm front extending all the way up into kind of northern Missouri to central Illinois. So, depending on how much instability there is up here, we may have a severe threat, at least a marginal severe threat up here, but we'll have to take a look at that in a second, see how far that moisture goes northward. GFS predicting probably much of the same, surface low development there Monday morning. We have a little bit of a different progression here. GFS gets the moisture, gets that warm front a little bit farther to the north here, northern Missouri into kind of northern Illinois. So a little bit of a difference there with kind of our sort of dry line / Pacific front somewhere in this vicinity across kind of east central Texas. So kind of the same as the NAM, but a little bit farther north. So we'll have to take a look at that. That will have implications on how far north that moisture gets and how far north the greatest severe threat will set up. So here's the European model, and that will go forward with time. And so the Euro model is much farther south with the surface low. You can see here the NAM is in kind of southeast Colorado, southwest Kansas, GFS in kind of western Kansas, and the European model definitely the farthest south of the two, somewhat similar to the NAM, with the warm front stretched across south central Kansas into northern Missouri, north central Missouri to central Illinois there as well. So overall fairly similar, but again some slight differences in the overall position of the surface low, and again that's going to have implications on how far north the moisture, the warm sector translates, and how far north that greatest severe threat is going to set up. So let's zoom in here to our southern plains sector. The European model does not have dew point here on this particular model site, College of DuPage, but that's okay. We can just start to kind of compare the NAM and GFS here. So we'll take a look at our dew points. So you can see those darker blues and purples sitting well into the Gulf. We've been kind of scoured by our last kind of cold front passage. But those, again, we have that deep sort of reservoir of moisture sitting in the Gulf, and that will start to get pulled northward come Sunday into Monday as that surface low starts to develop here in southeast Colorado, or in the vicinity of southeast Colorado. We'll start to get that moisture pulled northward. And by Monday morning, we should have much of East Texas into maybe southeast Oklahoma, southwest Arkansas, much of Louisiana in the open warm sector. And you can see how broad this warm sector is. Very broad swath of strong low-level moisture here. So that means there's going to be a lot of room for potentially some prefrontal storms. And again, here's our kind of dry line / Pacific front here, centered across kind of just west of the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area, which is right in there. And again, broad warm sector out ahead of that. So we're going to have to keep an eye out for any prefrontal confluence bands and to see if we get a potential for discrete storms with this setup. We'll take a look at that in a second as well. So the moisture by 21Z on Monday, well up into southern Missouri, southeast Kansas even, much of eastern Oklahoma, and with the highest dew points down here in East Texas into the Arklatex vicinity. GFS should be much of the same. Again, the placement of that surface low will have implications of how far north that moisture gets. So GFS kind of destabilizes here a little bit faster than the NAM, it looks like. You can see let's take a look at 9Z Monday. You can see those red lines. That's our lifted index contours. That's just another measure of instability in the atmosphere. So the atmosphere will be destabilizing here pretty rapidly, according to the GFS, a little bit faster than the NAM, but pretty much a similar scenario here, a very broad warm sector, those 60s dew points all the way up into southern Missouri by 18Z. just after lunchtime on Monday, and we should have a broad warm sector ahead of that Pacific front / dry line there in East Texas to the Arklatex by Monday afternoon. Let's take a look at some forecast soundings here. We'll take one out here, kind of Tyler Longview area out in the open warm sector on both models here. So let's see. So this is going to be Tyler Longview on the GFS, and we'll take one here on the NAM as well. And so GFS, you can see destabilized atmosphere very nicely here. Mixed layer CAPE above 1200 joules per kilogram. Low level instability is adequate, just above 50 joules per kilogram there. So decently adequate low level instability there and deep layer instability for severe storms. Nice curvature there in the low level hodograph, large looping hodographs there with strong deep layer shear approaching 45 knots there. So this environment would be favorable for supercell development. If we take a look at the NAM here, NAM is firing some convection out in this area, which is a little bit concerning. This is out in the open warm sector at 21Z. NAM is firing some convection here. Let's see if we can take a sounding away from that convective contamination. But the fact that the NAM is firing open warm sector convection, which is these red bars here, tells us we have upward vertical motion, and which is indicative of convection. That is a little bit concerning. We'll take a look at the potential for prefrontal storms here in a second. This is a little bit away from that convective contamination. Still have a little bit of it here, but much less. The NAM, interestingly enough, is much more reserved on the instability, and that's interesting. The NAM is usually a little bit more gung-ho, a little bit more aggressive with the overall instability, and the fact that it's showing a little bit less here is interesting. Although we do know the NAM has a kind of a cold bias here. Surface temperatures tend to be a little bit too cool with the NAM. So that'll be something to note. Expect temperatures to get into the 70s here, and this sounding only showing 69 degrees. But so we'll keep that in mind. GFS showing a little bit more robust instability, but our wind profile here very favorable for severe weather. Large looping hodographs there in the low levels approaching 400 meters squared per second squared effective SR storm relative helicity. Large looping hodographs there. We do have a little bit of a sort of messy mid-level hodograph there. We've talked about the kink in the past, and there's of course the debate about veer back veer. You know, if we can, depending on storm mode, if we can establish a discrete storm mode, this shouldn't have too much of an issue. This may hamper the overall long track tornado threat. Wouldn't really hamper the overall tornado threat, but this could tend to interrupt mesocyclones eventually, and if we have a discrete storm mode, perhaps allow for less of a long track tornado threat. But we'll have to keep that in mind. There are some differences here in the hodographs between the two models. A little bit of a kink there in the GFS as well. A little bit of a backing signature there in the mid-levels, about 700 millibars or so. But we'll have to keep that in mind. Still a wind profile that is favorable for tornadic supercells here. So as we go on with time, we'll see that dry line set up and then push off toward the east pretty rapidly as we go after dark on Tuesday. Now let's take a look at a couple things. Let's see if we can see any prefrontal confluence bands here. And the NAM is definitely showing some signs of that. Our dry line / Pacific front, somewhere back in here. Maybe sort of back in here, actually. And then, so notice this little kink in the isobars here. This could be some semblance of a prefrontal trough, prefrontal confluence band. You can actually see the winds here just right along that dry line or just east of the dry line out of the south-southwest, shifting to just maybe due southerly there, out to the east in the open warm sector. So maybe some semblance of a prefrontal confluence band here setting up across southern Oklahoma into northern Texas. That may initiate storms out ahead of the main dry line. So that'll be something to watch for sure as we go into Monday. One thing we can also look at here is the 850 millibar streamlines. If we see a little bit of an elevated sort of signature there, which we don't really see. We want to see these streamlines maybe dip a little bit, as we would like to see on our prefrontal trough with our isobars kind of kinked there in the open warm sector. Don't really see that there at 850 millibars, but we do see maybe some semblance of a confluence band setting up here on the NAM across just ahead of the dry line in northeast Texas on Monday. So that'll be something to watch for sure. Let's see if the GFS has something similar. And so our dry line is probably out in this vicinity here. So our dry line out in here somewhere. And maybe we do see a little bit of that, some semblance of a prefrontal kind of confluence, or prefrontal confluence band / kind of prefrontal trough there across northeast and east Texas that may help initiate storms. And by nature, these open warm sector kind of confluence bands have very subtle sort of forcing along them. Subtle confluence there. You can see instead of the winds going kind of due west on the west side of the confluence band to due easterly on the east side of the confluence band, we have very subtle confluence here. South-southwest kind of due south flow right across that confluence band. So that will be subtle forcing by nature, perhaps a more discrete storm mode initially with those storms forming along the confluence band. We'll take a look at storm mode here as well overall. So keep in mind where our dry line is. Dry line kind of right in here, basically north-south, maybe a north-northeast to south-southwest tilt there. And let's take a look at our bulk shear vectors here. So keep in mind where that dry line is, somewhere in there. And so our shear vectors are somewhere like this. Decent amount of parallelness, if you will, with our 0 to 6 kilometer bulk shear vectors in relation to our initiating boundary, which would be our dry line / Pacific front. So storms forming along the dry line may be a little bit more messy in nature, a little bit more linear in nature. Maybe a little bit of a window for discrete storms as the trough moves in Monday, sort of mid-afternoon, but they should perhaps, given this orientation of the shear vectors with the initiating boundary, tend to get a little bit messy with time. Now out in the open warm sector, kind of the same thing. Our confluence band kind of north-south, shear vectors oriented kind of along that confluence band, but again, by nature, the forcing along that confluence band is going to be much more subtle. So we do have a chance for discrete storms out here, kind of across eastern to northeast Texas initially along that confluence band. So looks like kind of a mixed mode sort of scenario here. We'll take a look at the GFS and just kind of compare it. Look at storm mode here real quick. Very similar orientation of the dry line. Shear vectors definitely very parallel to that dry line boundary. So kind of the same thing as what the NAM was showing. So looks like more of a mixed mode type event here. Storms should initially fire once that 500 millibar trough moves in. Let me zoom back out here to the continental U.S. We'll take a look at Tuesday here. Just going to kind of wrap up Monday here. So storms should start to fire once that kind of belt of flow moves into the region, maybe early to mid-afternoon on Monday. The main forcing will arrive, and that's when storms will fire both along the dry line, perhaps a short window for discrete storms there before merging into more of a kind of mixed mode scenario, more of a messy storm mode along the dry line. We'll have to watch out in the open warm sector for storms there on Monday that may have a chance to be slightly more discrete in nature. Also, going back to our discussion on the elevated mix layer that's going to be moving in from the Mexican plateau on Monday. This is how we start out on 15Z. This is in north central Texas. And notice the very stout capping inversion that's in place thanks to that elevated mix layer. Layer of steep lapse rates aloft there, warmer air, drier air there aloft. That's going to help cap things off in the open warm sector. So we may have some clouds around, maybe some very elevated showers, just as a result of the strong moisture advection that will be ongoing in the morning on Monday. But the warm sector should be free and clear of storm development during the morning and early into the kind of lunchtime hour, because this stout capping inversion will be in place for quite a while. And if we go through with time, we'll go to 18Z here and take a look at how that capping inversion progresses. This is at 15Z, so 9 a.m. Central Standard Time. 18Z NAM model has that capping inversion sticking around a little bit, slowly eroding as that trough starts to move in. Deeper sort of moist layer, that moist layer deepening beneath that capping inversion, so we're building up instability with time there as we go forward into the afternoon on Monday. And then by 21Z, as we saw, fully destabilized storm initiation should be underway sometime after 18Z, probably around maybe 1 to 2, maybe 3 p.m. or so in north central Texas and vicinity. I want to take one more sounding here at 0Z just to kind of look at how the atmosphere progresses with time. That low-level jet should stick around through the evening hours. Just want to take a sounding here, and we still don't really resolve that kind of wonkiness in the mid-level hodograph there. A little bit of a backing signature there in the mid-levels, a little bit of a weakness there at 850 to 700 millibars or so, but still a very strong looking profile for some tornadic supercells there with very strong low-level shear and curvature in that hodograph. So let's go back to 500 millibars here, see how things progress into Tuesday. And so we'll take a look. This is at 18Z Tuesday. We'll go to that on the GFS as well. 18Z Tuesday. So this is about lunchtime on Tuesday. And we do see some subtle differences here between the three models. Let me go back here. So this is 18Z Tuesday on the Euro. So you can see quite a bit of difference here in how this is depicted. A little bit of a closed wave still on all three models, but definitely a difference in how the flow around that wave is handled by all of the models. So definitely some discrepancy still in place for Tuesday. That's probably why they have not included a 30%, or partly why they haven't included a 30% or stronger sort of signal for severe storms here in their outlook, just because we still have some model differences remaining. But overall, we do have that trough kind of lifting away from the southeast, kind of away from the region, leaving just kind of broad southwesterly flow out across the southeast states here. And that is evident in all three models as well. Although the Euro a little bit farther south maintains that stronger flow, a little bit farther south may have some implications there with the progression of the system and the evolution of the storms there on Tuesday. We'll go down to 850 millibars, and we should be able to see kind of the same thing here. So that low-level jet will maintain itself across the Arklatex going into Tuesday evening, shifting off toward the east and northeast with time. By Tuesday, we will have a kind of this broad low-level jet. The main axis of that will have shifted off toward the northeast, but still a semblance of a strong low-level jet there into Mississippi and Alabama for Tuesday. Same thing on the GFS and the NAM. Still, you can see the NAM, that very strong low-level jet shifted off toward the northeast, but still that has maintained itself into the southeast. So strong shear profile should maintain themselves into the southeast, and our surface low should be well off toward the north as well. And this is interesting. We've seen this in the past couple of the past setups in this kind of active second season, where we had our kind of main surface low, main wave kind of shift away from the region of interest. And that's what we're going to have happen on Tuesday. And that has could have a couple of impacts. We should have probably lots of storms firing here on in Texas into Louisiana and Arkansas on Monday evening. That should kind of congeal into a complex or line of storms moving along the Pacific front into Tuesday morning and afternoon, moving into the southeast. But because the main forcing is kind of moving away from the region, let's go ahead and look at this. So we see that the Pacific front starts to shift pretty quickly off toward the east on Tuesday, but because the forcing is moving away, notice how it slows down as it approaches the Mississippi River Delta there come Tuesday afternoon. So that's very interesting. The front kind of slows itself down. And let me zoom in here on the GFS as well and show you that kind of same thing. GFS, so you'll see the Pacific front surges pretty quickly as that forcing moves in, and as the forcing moves away, that frontal zone, or that dry line or Pacific front, really slows down as it moves into, if we go into the late morning and afternoon hours on Tuesday. So what is that going to do? Well, any storms along this may have a chance to devolve into more of a broken sort of line, maybe some more semi-discrete elements in here. And it also maintains a broad warm sector out ahead of that. So we may have plenty of room for discrete supercells to fire in the open warm sector. So let's take a look at the prospects for that. So we'll see if we see any sort of confluence bands or prefrontal troughs here. So our main sort of frontal zone back out here, eastern Louisiana into Mississippi, northern Mississippi. We do see some semblance of maybe some prefrontal troughs out in here, a little bit of troughiness there out ahead of the main dry line. So we could have some semblance of discrete storm development out there in the open warm sector on Tuesday afternoon. We also see a little bit of a kink there in the streamlines here, a couple of kinks here in the streamlines out in the open warm sector. So we'd keep an eye on that south central Mississippi vicinity out well ahead of the main front for discrete supercell development. Kind of similar to our December 14th event, where we had a moderate risk here across southern Mississippi, southeast Louisiana. We had a significant tornado near New Orleans, as well as several near in southern and southeast Mississippi into southwest Alabama. That looks to be perhaps a similar scenario to what we're going to see on Tuesday. Again, model differences still remain, but some of these models are showing these evidence for prefrontal discrete convection out in the open warm sector on Tuesday afternoon ahead of the main line along the kind of surging front. Again, that surging front will slow down. And let's take a profile out here ahead. We'll take southern Mississippi right here and kind of see the profile and not a ton of low-level shear here to speak of. Again, the farther south you go, the farther away from the low-level jet you get. We'll take one here a little bit farther north and see if we get a little bit stronger low-level shear. No, so not a ton of low-level shear. This would be, though, adequate for some tornadoes here. Strong low-level instability, though. That is one thing to keep in mind. Very strong low-level instability, 0 to 3 kilometer cape, 133 joules per kilogram on this particular sounding. Deep layer instability, mixed layer cape, above 1,600 joules per kilogram. So very unstable atmosphere with enough low-level shear for a few tornadoes there. And again, with strong low-level instability, any spin in the low levels is going to be efficiently tilted and stretched into the vertical for maybe more efficient tornado genesis with storms on Tuesday. Take a look at maybe the GFS here. Let's take a look and see where our strongest belt of 850 millibar flow is. Looks like western Alabama or so. Let's take a sounding here on the GFS, and this is a little bit more favorable. Here you can see still favorable instability profile there, but a little bit stronger low-level shear with the GFS here. So we'll have to keep that in mind. The threat for both storms along the front, along the dry line / Pacific front there, as well as out in the open warm sector on Tuesday, definitely going to be something to watch. So that's going to kind of wrap things up here. Just kind of the initial thoughts on this upcoming multi-day severe weather threat. Once again, for Monday, January 2nd, day 3, we have an enhanced risk, including places like Little Rock, the Arklatex vicinity, places like Shreveport, Tyler, Longview, down toward Lufkin and Nacogdoches. Again, expect some shifts in these overall contours here over the coming days. But for right now, the Arklatex vicinity is under the gun for the greatest severe weather threat on Monday. Dallas-Fort Worth, once again, would keep an eye out for severe storms. Wouldn't be surprised if these lines shift back west a little bit to fully include the DFW Metroplex. But for now, the eastern portions of the Metroplex are under the greatest threat for severe weather on Monday, as well as areas like Houston and Galveston, Lake Charles, and places like Fort Smith. And once again, some model discrepancy still remains as to how far north the overall best warm sector is going to get. And so these lines may shift in northern and southern extent here with time here over the coming days. Then for Tuesday, the threat shifts out toward the southeast, places like southeast Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. Storms both along the main sort of front that will be moving off toward the east, slowing down as it gets toward this the Mississippi River Valley there, with the potential for some prefrontal discrete storms out ahead of that front. We'll have to keep an eye on that potential as well. So with that, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.